Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Assalatu wassalamu ala mursalin. Allah salli ala Muhammad. Alhamdulillah. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh, everyone. May peace be upon you wherever you are. Alhamdulillah, tonight in Singapore, maybe evening or daytime, everywhere else you're watching this live on the Muslims Art and Film Festival. This is our last segment, and we have a wonderful and interesting someone who I admire the most in doing design, photography, and publication, CD Sohail Nakhooda. And the title for tonight, which is interesting, Bridging a Fractured World Through the Lens of Journalism. Can we invite CD Sohail to join us now? MashaAllah. Assalamualaikum, CD.
Walaikum salam.
How are you?
Thank you very much, Sidi Khalid. I'm very well, very well. It's a pleasure to to see you finally after so many years. That I think the last time I was in Singapore was what, 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years ago. Yeah.
I'm really happy to be part of this program, and thank you for inviting me. And so
thank you for
a good evening and a good afternoon, a good morning for every participant that's listening to this. I hope that will not bore everyone to death, but
we are actually blessed and honored to have you on board with your vast experience in many fields. Actually, we want to learn from you, Sidi. So, Sidi, before we proceed with the interview, I believe you have a video that you like to share with us. Can you tell us more about the video?
Yes, well, I prepared this, for this event. So, because we were talking about photography and publishing and design, and photography is something I do. I'm a serious amateur. I wouldn't call myself a professional, but I take it very seriously. And so this is a collage of some samples of my photos that will give a range of what I do, and my style of photographing, and over the decades. So some of it is from Libya. From the UK, from the US, from the Emirates, some from Malaysia, and different parts of the world. So I hope it gives you some glimpse of of some of the stuff that I will be sharing with you later in this conversation. And this, I just want to thank the team here in Amman at Libya's channel, because their team of expert videographers helped me put this together. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm grateful for them.
MashaAllah. Yeah. I think shall we play the video now?
There should be sound also.
Yeah. No, I think. MashaAllah, beautiful city. All the photos are very sharp and really capture my my attention. MashaAllah, may Allah preserve you. You all these. I always look up to your posting on the photography in your Facebook. MashaAllah, and I really enjoyed it. Subhanallah. Thank you once again for joining us, Sidi. And for those who are watching us, just like to say a few things before we start the interview. That is, Sidi Sohail used to be the editor of Islamica, and that's how I got to know about him, his name first, Sohail Nakhooda. And I was really mesmerized by the magazine. Actually, I bought all the issues and really keep it very nicely. It's well done. Sidi, my first question to you in regards to your work that you did before, like Islamica, for example. When you first started Islamica magazine, the vision was to broaden perspectives on Islam and provide a forum for Muslims to articulate their concern while establishing cross-cultural relations between Muslims and their neighbors and co-religionists. Why was this such an important objective for this magazine?
Sure, thank you. Thank you for that question. Well, I arrived in the UK in the mid 80s. And prior to that, I had already lived in several countries. I was born in Mozambique, and then my family moved to Hong Kong, and then to Portugal, where I was for a long time, and then to Ireland, and to Spain, and briefly for the UK, and then Pakistan. And it was, from Pakistan that I ended up, with the family coming to the UK and staying an extended period. And it was at that time that I went to school in the UK for the first time, and and then university and so on. But England or the UK in the 80s was a very difficult place. I think out of all the countries I lived and visited, I found the UK scene, as it were, perhaps the most difficult to tackle. And clearly, when I went to the university, to the London School of Economics in 1989 to do my undergraduate degree, what was happening there was similar to what was happening in most campuses throughout the United Kingdom. And that is a deep fracture in the campuses amongst Muslim students. There was extremism. This was a period of time when we had not just radical Salafism, but we had Hizb ut-Tahrir, which was an absolute nuisance, and its offshoot, the Muhajirun, and the ideas of the Islamic State and the Khilafah and so on. And on the other hand, amongst the radical Salafis, you had this kind of, aggressive, kind of posture to demolish all the schools of law, of theology, of Sufism, and so on. And so the young Muslim, particularly even those which were fairly intelligent, were caught in this kind of, competing visions of what Islam was, when none of them, neither of them, were actually, authentic versions of our religion. And even, if students came from fairly progressive backgrounds or from educated backgrounds, up and down the country, the Islam, however, that they met was either of these two versions. Mm-hmm. And both of them were not progressive. They were both retarded, in my opinion. And I'm sorry, but in this interview, I might be blunt about many things. And I don't necessarily like to, not to be blunt on issues. So that's the way I usually discuss things. So I hope no one's going to sue me for this. But, if there are questions, they can always engage with me. But this was a very difficult time. The Muslim groups that were there, and particularly their ideologues, were not giving the young Muslim community any direction whatsoever. Neither were the Muslim young people growing in learning in a way that was productive for their lives, both as human beings, as citizens, as family members, and so on. But at the same time, it was killing their spirit, from within, through this kind of dark vision of what Islam is, this polarized, kind of Manichaean conception of sin and salvation, and the world and the hereafter, and so on. It was almost as if, they had given up, living in this universe. And either it was all about total control, of dominating, of a theology that was into politics, into militarism, into extremism, but one that wanted to control, the state as a way of controlling the public. Or it was simply an absurd kind of, regression into solitude where, the nature of how they viewed religion was simply so reduced that it was impossible for them to, to engage with anyone else. Everything was a sin. It was darkness everywhere. They had difficulties adjusting to their own families. So and this came inside the university. So when a young Muslim joined a university, even if they were the top 1% of their communities, it didn't matter. It was the same problem that they were all experiencing. And it was impossible, to do anything constructive. So when I joined the university, I noticed these things too. But we decided at the university not to replicate the same models and perhaps try something completely different. And that is that the Islamic society, the nucleus where Muslim students would gather and congregate around the country, should not be this mini, khilafat within the campus. That kind of notion, had to go. Rather, in my opinion, what I wanted at the LSE was to create a community, a learning community, a support community, a community that is active, but in the best of ways. And so the idea was not that you would gender segregate and you would bring the khilafah inside the university or anything like this. Rather, bring a community of Muslims together, whether they were secular or super pious or beards or no beards, hijab or no hijab, whether they were from Pakistan or England or from America, it really didn't matter, whether they were Muslim or non-Muslim. But the fact that they were coming together and providing each other support, learning together, and perhaps discussing things, pushing their own, levels of knowledge of what they knew, was to me the most important thing that eventually led to Islamica. Why? Because they came from backgrounds where their own understanding of Islam was very fragmented, but also very reduced. We have a great civilization, and we have, at least in Sunni Islam, I cannot speak much for the Shia Islam because I'm not an expert, but at least in my tradition, we had the two schools of Aqidah, the Asharis and Maturidis. We had the four schools of Islamic law, the Hanafi, Hanbali, Shafi, and did I forget some? I think I forgot the fourth one. I said Shafi, Hanbali, Maliki, and Hanafi. And we had also the hundreds of Sufi tariqas that gave expression to spirituality. So we have within our ethos a very wide, civilizing, plural, diverse set of intellectual, platforms, that both deal with the heart, with the brain, and with our movements in society. And it was important to make sure that young Muslims understood that heritage. Rather than reducing the vision to just a series of issues about sin and salvation or the Islamic State, it was important that they understood who they are first. What are they sitting on? What is their patrimony? What is their heritage? And rather than brag about the fact that, we had a Biruni or Al-Ghazali or Ibn Sina and so on, well, how about, what about the next generation of Birunis and Ghazalis and Ibn Sinas and Rumis and so on? How is that going to come in the future? So to give them some grounding and some humility in their religion was critical. We wanted to form a learning community where we would invite speakers, poets, theologians from all sides. We had some amazing people coming in, talking about the latest books or ideas, or Karen Armstrong. We had, Imran Khan. We had a lot of people, from politicians to artists to theologians. And the idea was to create a safe space for discussion, a discursive space, as it were, where people could explore their religion, learn, because, when you are 18 and 19, how much Islamic State knowledge can you know? Not much, So I think that everyone needed to calm down a notch or two. And it was important to create a sustainable environment where learning was important. And I noticed one thing which I always found very, very bizarre, particularly in the UK, where a young Muslim would join Islamic society, and within its Islamic society, walls, as it were, they would pretend that this was the Caliphate, it was the Khilafah. But as soon as they would leave the meeting, they would be, joining their courses in economics, in logic, or in science, or whatever. And why is it that the same kind of, rationality, or let's say the same intelligence, was not shown when it came to religion, but it was shown when it came to their secular sciences? I never understood that kind of dichotomy in their brains, where you would be super smart, in your life, in the university, but when it came to religion, you'd be super retarded, and that had to, in a way, it wasn't something that was wholesome for us or for anyone else. And Islamica came out of that experience. We wanted to both learn about our heritage. We also wanted to contribute as thinking people, people who would be doing critical thinking to push our religion forward. That is not redefine our tenets of faith and so on, but simply move the discussions forward so we could grow with confidence. Okay, half of the problem is that when you just view religion as law and religion as politics, is that something is missing, and that is a love for your religion. That, of mercy or compassion and those kind of values, which are absolutely essential. So Islamica was a transformation from a physical, environment of the Islamic society into publishing, but the same values were translated into that. And we also noticed, as we invited people to our seminars and workshops, which we did, I think sometimes we'd have within an academic year almost 100 speakers from around the world. It became clear to us that many people who were outside, the LSE or in Glasgow or Harvard or Oxford or in Malaysia or elsewhere, were following what we were doing and wanted to be part of this particular effort. So the magazine was a way to extend the discussion beyond the confines of our own university and to somehow create a network of like-minded people that would be discussing learning together. So you remember the twin things of, one is that we have to learn, and we have to stop this idea that at age 18 and 19, we have the answers of the whole universe and destiny and so on. And at the same time, as thinking people, as intelligent people, begin to see how is it that we can contribute to the building of or rebuilding of Islamic civilization in all fields, from economics to politics to science to Sufism to poetry to literature, whatever it was, to make again a religion aspect of it relevant, to people's concerns. And so that was, in a way, how Islam came about to solve the issue of the fractured nature of the communities that were in the UK at the time.
MashaAllah, so profound and so in-depth, Sidi. But Sidi, journalism and publishing bridges scholars, like you mentioned just now, all walks of life, different fields contributing, right? Like thinkers, writer, activists, musician, poet, and people whoever in their own field or specialists in certain field provide better representation and highlight perspective which might have been downplayed. How important do you think it is today to bridge people together through publishing and the written word?
I think that, it's absolutely important. I think every age has its own needs. And I think that the need of our times is to make ourselves understood and to also communicate, who we are and what we believe. And our values and also our views. And I think that the communication is key for the transmission of anything, from feelings to whatever it is that you have in mind, you want to share with someone else. It requires communication, whether it is to one person or it is to a million. It's the same system, as it were, the same process. But what we are terrible at doing is to figure out how to communicate to the world. And I think that in this, we need to understand what idiom is it that we need to use to communicate what we believe and what we want to share to the world in the best way possible. And that's where we find the issue of not communication. We all Muslims, we talk a lot. Our families talk a lot. We have a lot of ventures, but why is it that the impact is not felt? What's going wrong? Are we talking over people? Are we talking about issues which don't matter to them? Are we talking the language that they don't understand? What is it? And I think that that's the failure. I think that part of the problem is that we've failed to mainstream our efforts. Whenever you want to be a Muslim, the discussion is always, and it's tiring, that discussion, oh, I'm a Muslim, I should do something Islamic, otherwise I'm not authentic. Well, I think that's poppycock for me, You're a Muslim and you contribute first in your own field of endeavor, and you become the best at it. So if it's journalism that you wish to go to, go for it. So many people that I know who had a great skill in writing, a great skill in communicating, that were master wordsmiths, didn't go into journalism because either their parents, decided it wasn't good for them, or because of peer pressure. The peer pressure was actually the worst, because what happened in this peer pressure group? Oh, don't join the newspaper or the magazine because it's all dominated by anti-Muslim voices. You'll never get yourself published. They'll never give you a chance. Everything they write is always anti-Muslim. I think that kind of nonsense, really, I think affected our community's ability to enter domains of communication that were vital for the creation of attitudes. And I don't mean here that, it's not an intelligence kind of, effort where we were programming people to join this group. No, not at all. But it's important to be a writer. It's important to write that novel, that everyone reads. It's important to write that article that everyone reads. It's important in a way to write that, to produce that film that everyone watches. It's important to produce that music that everyone will come and listen to, All of it is form of communication, from poetry to painting to filmmaking to acting, all of it, from photography, all of it are mediums of communicating, from feelings which are difficult to express, are intangible, and to tangible feelings which are more material. And I think that this is where we fail. The whole industry of journalism, needs a lot more Muslims taking part without fear. And again, without making it all about Islam. They should be writing about everything from football to music to critique, on art, to architecture, to make their views felt about the world, about international relations, diplomacy, human trafficking, whatever it is. I mean, why is it that in the UK you have the Turner Prize, which is an art prize that's issued every year? Where is the Muslim writing about, the Turner Prize? Why is it that the Muslim has to be typecast into believing that he or she can only write about Muslim issues? And I think so long as that keeps happening, none of the writers ever make a name for themselves or transcend their niche. And I think that whilst, yes, niche is good, yes, we're Muslims, so we write about Muslim things, that's okay, that's fine. But what it does, it restricts your range of vision or your field of vision. You should be writing for the whole world. Why just for Muslims, why is your particularity so niche that only 5 people listen to you, And I think that that's where. So work with the best. My advice has always been, if you're great at journalism, well, then you're going to have to struggle, join a newspaper, start as an intern, even if you have to make coffee, learn from the masters which are in that particular industry how to write, how to edit, how to chase stories, and go and get that Pulitzer Prize, Make a name in your name. I think we have to simply stop thinking that, well, our only success as Muslims is within, ventures which are so niche and an island unto themselves that they have no impact, And then we look at the broad range of 10 or 15, 20 years, and we find out that we've had very little impact, even though we've had many Muslims doing many things, because we simply were not effective in our modes of or idioms of communication. And even if right now you are, sorry to go on, but even if you are very progressive, if you believe in kind of post-colonial literature, or you are a woke, individual, whatever it is, you still have to know your Shakespeare. You still have to know, your John Donne. Or what I'm saying is that wherever it is that you're situated, in whatever, region or geographic location you are based, you have to know that particular culture well, and to be able to talk to them in a language and in a mode that makes sense to them. And so I would now still encourage, I would definitely encourage young people to go into that field, even if that whole industry has become, is suffering. Let's just say suffering, financially, because, print journalism is a declining, industry at the moment. Yeah. But it's a struggle worth making.
It's like a meltdown. You call it now everywhere. People, but see, I just want to digress a bit. I have known some people who love journalism, who love to write, and they really like write, but they are not like those people who you mentioned where they can articulate well sentences and that sort of top-notch journalism. And you also mentioned about learning from someone and learning how to get the news, learning how to be creative. So such people, are they able to be part or to be in the field of journalism if someone were to say your English is not that, or your writing, I mean, like not that standard to be journalism? I've met some people who have interest, who have passion in it. Yeah.
I think, in my career as a publisher, part of the thing I loved the most was to find talent. It's, mentoring talent or creative young talent is perhaps the most satisfying thing out there. And even in Islamica, many young writers came and they were all over the place, when they were writing. They had talent, they had raw talent, and they had a way with words, but they simply didn't know how to put an article together, or how to write in a way that would be effectively read or communicated to someone else. And so it took a while. It took a lot of training. They themselves had to train. They had to take additional classes. They had to push themselves. Some of their work was rejected, and they had to be open to critique. That's the other problem. You're not going to make it in anything, whether it is design or publishing or photography or whatever, if you are not open to criticism and you do something with it. And I think that I've seen many people that had an amazing talent, an amazing way of expressing themselves, even if they didn't know how to write, but they had something in them that made expression possible or easy. And they were able to express difficult things in a very simple way and in a very effective way. But it took a bit of time to develop their craft or to hone their rough edges. and to make sure that they became effective writers. And then they went on to do great things. They joined The Guardian, they joined, other standard publishing, ventures which were far bigger than ours. And so you don't want to stop a talent. You want them to develop as much as possible and have impact in this career. But if you find someone who has that skill, push them ahead.
Yeah, mashallah, indeed. I think in particular our community felt that if you are not good enough, then you shouldn't proceed. So I think that's one of the things that a lot of young people, Muslim, I'm referring to, that they sort of half-hearted whenever they hear this. I mean, I wish everyone is like you, where we are given the chance to grow and to improve ourselves.
I think that, part of it is also the problem of our communities. I think that our own greats have not paid sufficient effort or time to mentoring and to creating a new generation of people that could take over that particular field, whether it is in photography or design or writing or filmmaking or whatever. I think that we have to think very carefully to make sure that we are picking new talent that perhaps can not only become a great name themselves in the field, but also can push the whole discussion or the whole effort of Muslim contribution much more than we have been able to do. And I think that it requires community support. It also requires support from the greats of that industry. I think they themselves have to realize that it's about time that they also share their talent.
Yeah,
and took people by the hand when it came to teaching and learning and transferring knowledge. I think that there is no other way. Whether you're mentoring business entrepreneurship or whether you're mentoring, in photography, whatever it is, even teaching someone how to write or produce a CV or apply for a grant, all of it requires, mentoring. And I think that we have to pay attention to that. It's actually vital.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. Sidi, relating to that, what you had said, right? Among the hallmarks of good journalism is the ability to ask the question, which offer a unique, urgent, and important perspective on the story at hand. Based on your experience, right, Sidi, what are some of the bigger questions that all of us need to begin asking ourselves in order to have a deeper understanding of ourselves and what's happening around the world?
Yeah, I think that, part of doing critical thinking and philosophy and theology and Kalam and Sufism and everything else is that you broaden your mind. The range of questions that you ask yourself and others are that much more complex. And I think that it's that kind of complexity that we have to bring. We encourage our own children to ask. And even, they ask the toughest questions, children, and we know that. But that spirit of asking questions is something that should never, ever be curtailed. Throughout their lives, they should be asking questions, They should be asking questions even to their bosses, to their peers. They should be asking questions to their sheikhs, to everyone else, until they die, because the process of learning will never cease. But the good question is what triggers, new development. And people have to learn how to ask questions. And they have to ask questions from several vantage points. Because then that's when you get the creative kind of, nexus of energy, that does, develop things forward. And when we repress questions, or when we don't have a space where those questions can be safely asked, I think that's the greatest disservice that we can do to the human mind. The human mind has questions. It generates questions. It's deeply critical. And I think that we have to, in a way, respect that those very critical modes which are in our brain, and even those which are in our heart, and to be able to express them without fear or where in environments that they'll be taken seriously. Okay, even if if they're wrong, it doesn't matter. The main thing is that you're asking. Your brain is fertile, and you're learning. And so, but what kind of questions are people asking now? All kinds of stuff, What is a community? What is individualism? What is freedom? What is responsibility? We've had a lot of freedom, but if you see young people today, very few of them know about their responsibilities to their families, to their communities, to the world. issue of citizenship. When you are talking about Islamic State, however, the rest of the world has a concept called a citizen. So what happens to those notions? You can't build an Islamic State without having a very deep and developed conception of what a citizen is. If you don't have that conception, don't build this Islamic State, because it could become a repressive leviathan. Now, God in the universe, religion and science has become a key discussion in this age. Revolution and stability over the last 10 years, questions of revolution, were they good or bad? Can society change any other way? Is stability more important than a convulsion, where you have displacement, refugees, and destruction? Or how? And how do you create freedom and space to think and to live with dignity? We have cosmopolitan identities. So much needs to be kind of explored because it's not like before. Now, a young kid is listening to the same music, in one part of the universe, of our planet and the other. So all of these questions are key. But there's something fundamental also, particularly in religion, that is, as people move away, or as many, in Western, at least in modern societies, move away from organized religion, it's not as if that they're all becoming atheists. Yes, many of them are becoming agnostic because they simply cannot find the answers from their own religious communities or from the structures which are, representing those communities, or from the teachers which seem to convey, what that religion is all about. However, they are gravitating to spirituality. They have a need for a spiritual kind of existence. And so those questions of spirituality, of religion, of agnosticism are all things which are being discussed right now. And I think that it's a space where a lot of humility is required and a lot of deep thinking and listening is going to have to be done, rather than simply, coming into the discussion from a vantage point of knowing everything. I think we really have to kind of listen to these issues and find ways of bringing spirituality back into people's lives that can give them meaning and perhaps more authenticity.
Inshallah. Interesting and beautiful, Sidi, your answer. In your working experience, right, Sidi, as a publisher and editor, you have covered many pertinent issues that affect the Muslim world and humanity at large. Just now we are talking about how we give space to young people and the question and so on. Many would look at this issue and seeing a crumbling world at the brink of no return and lose hope. Right, with social media, everything comes right in your face. In your experience, how can one have keen awareness of the issue yet use it to become a means of positive change in society?
Okay, even the first Christians, in the early Christian church, always felt that the apocalypse or Armageddon was very near. Mm-hmm. When Baghdad was ransacked by the Mongols, I'm sure that the citizen or the resident of Baghdad thought that was the end of the world. When Attila the Hun ran across from Mongolia all the way, to Europe, many people who were killed, probably their families thought that was the end. History is relative. If you say that, well, this is the worst age ever in terms of war, well, what about the two world wars? That was even more catastrophic than what we have now. It's always relative. There will always be conflict, and there will always be conflict everywhere. We've never had, entire centuries and centuries and centuries of peace because human beings are what they are. However, and it doesn't mean, because I think too much apocalyptical kind of, Armageddon type of thinking can also lead to a loss of hope, okay? And when you have loss of hope, you stop almost being productive, in a good sense, because otherwise, when you have despair, all that emanates out of that is dark, is darkness or negative energy. And I think negative energy, in a way, exacerbates the problem even more. I see a lot of young people, our own Muslims, completely demoralized and depressed, but their minds are full of end of times, prophecies which they try to interpret, which they shouldn't interpret, but they try to, and full of conspiracy ideas, which are easily found on the internet. And I think that what that does is that it really robs them of hope and kind of ability to see through and how to work through solutions, that perhaps that can be very readily done on all matters. Some, of course, are more difficult than others, but there is always something positive that one can do. So in that way, I think that it's important to fight that, because yes, we have a lot of issues right now facing, but it should not lead to depression, and to trauma. And I think that we have to figure out a way to be able to experience beauty. I mean, colors, the world is very colorful, you find goodness everywhere. You find, self-sacrifice everywhere. You find beauty everywhere, even in the most remarkably remote of places, So feel the air, feel the breeze, and then look at the colors of the, that are in front of you, and quit this kind of, this demoralizing, kind of perspective of life, which then affects every single speech and khutbah and sermon that they give. It affects every single perspective that they, advise that they give to everyone else. And I think that is doing us a huge harm. Yes, there are problems which are of a very serious nature, but they require some serious thinking and development, But you have to always be optimistic and hopeful. If you lose that, then there's no way that we can solve anything, or work our way through difficult circumstances. So I think that, for me, that's important, because without that ingredient, we always, I mean, every week I see Islamic scholars, preaching doom and gloom, and the world is ending tomorrow, and it never does. And then, what it does is simply it retards the brain into being unable to do something constructive, for their own communities or for everyone else. And I think that that's a really, really big danger that we have to be very, very careful of.
Siri, but I think I'd just like to see your perspective on this. Do you think that, I mean, everyone been blaming like social media is at fault because it changes the landscape of our life. It used to be nobody knows anything goes on until months or weeks later on. But now, like, even story may be manipulated or fake news and so on. So how do we find that balance in today's society, where people are easily triggered just because they saw something, unexpectedly happen, and as a journalist, as an editor, what do you advise for all these things? Yeah.
I mean, it's difficult, the problem now in journalism is that you have so much fake news that's generated because of the web, because of social media. It's very difficult to be able to adjudicate if an event sometimes happened this way or that way, or whether it happened in the first place, because of the fact that news travels so fast. Also, character assassination. People make all kinds of ludicrous claims and prophecies and accusations, and you find that by the time that you even finish reading the accusation, the news has already traveled all around the world. And it's very difficult to undo that. It also, social media has definitely reduced the attention span of our young people, and including our own. Our own, we also, have become perhaps habituated into looking at things very, very fast. But, I mean, that technological advancement cannot be stopped. Again, I think that the idea here is that we have to find ways of balancing, not negating a particular technological development, thinking that that negation or the fact that we're going to avoid it completely is going to solve our problems. It won't. We have to simply find a balance in how it can be utilized and used perhaps in a more optimal manner, in a more balanced manner than before. We still have to encourage our young kids and ourselves also to read books, to read longer articles, and to examine and to talk to people, and not simply to rely on the virtual interface. You have to go and meet someone, you have to hug them, you have to shake their hand, you have to look at their eyes and feel their emotions. All of that can't be done on the web, and definitely not through Zoom. For example, it's one thing that the experience of me and you sitting here through this interface is one thing. But if you and I were here sharing a cup of coffee and discussing, I bet you that that conversation would be very, very different. Of a deep and a deep connection could be built. So, but with this particular type of technology, you do get a lot of a lack of depth, and definitely a lack of depth and sophistication, and I think that affects our understanding. Although we think that we have a lot of facts, what we don't develop is wisdom, and that's what we have to be very, very careful of. A person who's on the net 24 hours is not necessarily wiser. He has a lot of bits of information. Some of it may be true, some of it may not be true. And of course, their emotions are heightened because everything happens in real time. You know, a bomb that explodes in Baghdad, suddenly you read it in Malaysia in the next minute, you know, and people go out nowadays and report it with their mobile phones. So, you know, before there was at least some filter, there was some time lag. Even there was a time lag for you to kind of absorb all this information and make sense of it in your mind. Now there isn't. You know, you have to react to it fast. Your emotions get kind of turned, you know, into it very, very quickly. There's a barrage of information that comes in from all kinds of perspectives, and it's often very, very difficult to find a moment or at least some distance from it all to understand exactly what's going on. So technology will develop. You can't stop that particular trend, and that's how it was. You know, since the world was created, you know, we had the wheel, and that led eventually to the cart, and to the car, and to the airplane, and to everything else. And I think that that there is a propulsion of the human impulse to develop and to generate new technology, which is not going to stop. But we have to find space. We have to find space to read more, to understand people better, less superficially than we do on the internet. And I think that that's the only way that's going to provide us some depth in an otherwise a situation that perhaps can become very, very superficial. You know?
Yeah, mashallah, beautiful explanation. From your travels and various projects around the world, as you mentioned that you've been to UK, US, and now in Jordan, you know, traveling around. Also being a founding editor-in-chief for Islamica Magazine, do you think that there is a common thread that binds that binds all of humanity together? If so, how can we promote more of this in this world?
I mean, you know, I think existence, you know, we're all the same. I mean, yes, we have our different expressions and cultures and, you know, eating habits and so on, and clothing. But when you live amongst different people, you know, you begin to see that the issues are virtually the same. You know, they have the same emotions, love, anger, you know, issues to do with paying their bills, putting their kids to school, getting a job, being able to feed their families, you know, making sure that there's security in their street, you know, the government is doing its job, you know, and so on and so forth. You know, is the healthcare working? Are the schools working? You know, and also longer questions. You know, what happens when I die? You know, I mean, there's a whole nexus of questions which we all share. You know, and I think that those are kind of things which touch everyone else, wherever we are. And so to be able to learn, you know, from them, wherever you are, to be able to appreciate diversity that people bring through their cultures, to be able to appreciate the generosity and courage that many people show wherever they are, whether they're Muslim, Sikh, or Hindu, or Buddhist, or atheist, or whatever. I think it's part of what we have to begin to kind of appreciate in a world that's now, you know, so compact because of travel and technology and so on. You know, we really are sharing one planet, and that means that many of the issues that we also face on politics, to economy, to culture, is virtually the same.
Inshallah, inshallah. Siri, as the saying goes, a picture tells 1,000 words. You know, photograph can be just as valuable as text as a medium of journalistic reporting. in your experience as both a photographer and a journalist, what are some of the creative differences in the process of finding and telling a particular story through photos as opposed to text? Yep.
Well, it's, I mean, in a sense, the activity is the same. That is of communicating something, whether it is by word or by something visual, like a photo, or even something oral, with music. You are communicating something either that's deep about yourself that you wish to convey, or you are trying to capture something that you're observing with your senses. And so, in a way, whether it is photography or the written word, it is there as a form of communication, but the modes of expression do vary. I mean, it's taking a photo requires you to visually see things. In the case of writing, you have to visually see, you see things in a slightly different mode of activity. And you express everything in words. Sometimes when you see the eye of a child, that you try to photograph, that single photo, still photo that is frozen, can bring so many words and expressions and symbols and meanings to your mind. You can see hope in the child, you can see anger, you can see trauma, you can see many things. And looking at the picture, all of those emotions can be flooded into your brain, into your apprehension. In the case of writing, you have to express yourself, you have to articulate, you have to define, you have to use words, to explain exactly that particular emotion, which is why I think that in a way both go together. The picture is able to tell something and the writing is also able to tell something. But I think that when they're both conjoined, where text, can perhaps complement the visual image, and the image can complement the text, I think you have a very powerful mechanism by which to express and to describe what you see, in the world. But of course, the process, you have to learn the camera, how to use it. In the other case of writing, you have to know your grammar, you have to know how to express yourself, but the creative process, it's quite unique. And with the photography, you have to make sure that you also are humble enough, and perhaps connected enough to the people that you take. I think that the best photographs usually come not when you least expect it, but perhaps when your heart is more connected to the subject matter than simply your brain, or your eyes. I think something special usually happens.
Inshallah, beautiful, Sidi. This question that I'm about to ask you is a very popular question since a decade ago, because online is very strong, present, and you know it as a journalist, as a, I'll call it publisher, right? So with advancement in technology, right, Sidi, many had turned to online channel instead of relying on print media. Do you think that print media is something that will be obsolete? Now we have Kindle and so on, Amazon doing something. What is the role of print media in a world where everyone is going paperless? Everyone is online now.
I love designing and printing books. I love the smell of books. The tactile experience of holding a book and feeling the paper. Part of sometimes why you select a certain type of paper is also because of its feel. You use a coated paper for a magazine, you would use a wove paper for a book, because the experience of reading and touching things, would be very different. And so it's a whole experience. But I think that as online, digital media develops, a new reading experience will inevitably develop. And it's inevitable. And I think that for everyone in the industry, I think we know that the days of print media are numbered. It will not have its heyday anymore in the 70s or 80s or 90s. It has been in decline as technology develops. And it's made it more accessible, and of course saved trees and so on. But I think that everyone that I know in the industry, including printing presses that are having to shift from their business from offset printing to digital printing, understand that the industry itself is going to change and change considerably. There are some reports that books are still selling well, and occasionally there's an increase in trend in some countries, but that's not sustainable. It's sporadic growth. It's not something that we see happening in a linear manner. Occasionally, as you know, in technology with the mobile phone started very big and then it became small and then it became big again and it became small again. These kind of fluctuating trends that reappear happen to be also the same for books. Sometimes when you get tired of reading everything on the screen, you want a book, And so there will be always books around, but I don't know if the economics of how to sustain it are going to be that much easier. I know that many publishers have had to fold over the last 10 years and close shop because they couldn't make any money, they couldn't sustain themselves, the sales were declining. And in the case of magazines, it's even worse. There's been a declining of sales, but also because of the decline of sales, there's been a decline of advertising. So no revenue has come in, making it almost impossible for them to compete. And with the cost of fuel also going up and transport costs becoming a nightmare, you find that very few can sustain it. So unless you have philanthropic, kind of entities like waqfs or trusts that can sustain magazines, most magazines that I know make a loss. With the exception of The Economist and perhaps one or two of the fashion magazines like Vogue or Tatler, which have a heavy dose of advertising in the first pages, maybe 30 to 40 pages sometimes. Every other magazine that's well known makes a loss. And those losses are sustained by trusts and by people who care about publishing. But without those, it's impossible to make revenue anymore. So we are going to see changes. We are already seeing changes. Many of the bigger names in print have already shifted, are beginning to shift their output to the web. Most people don't know how to make money from the web. So I don't know how that will be tackled, because even, New York Times, the Washington Post, or the Guardian, or the Times, or Telegraph, or whatever you have, each one is trying to explore ways of generating income by being online. And it's not terribly clear to most people in the industry how that can be achieved. So I think we are going to see more and more a paperless environment. People are enjoying reading on their Kindle. People are enjoying reading on their iPads. People are actually enjoying, as screens become better, more defined for mobile phones, they're actually reading books on their mobiles, and texts. So, when you watch a Tom Cruise film, you see that sometimes, you have screens that would appear where he would be able to read or check text. I think that it's quite foreseeable that in the future, at some point, we would see technology of that kind, and I think that it will affect the print industry, whether we like it or not.
But Shidi, what is the side effect of it that we are not seeing it? That publication will be obsolete. Is it the intellectual, tradition, knowledge? What are the side effects that we don't foresee?
Well, it's difficult to say. I think that, whenever technology or developments have happened in human history, there's always been problems, But I think that over time, the human beings have figured out a way to somehow internalize them and find a balance. I don't know if a balance will be found, for this, particularly given the fact that our attention spans are decreasing and more people are able to focus, for longer periods of time. And I think that's a danger. How it will affect scholarship, I think it will affect scholarship. Maybe not in print, but I think that they have to find ways of publishing their academic outputs online in ways that can be perhaps, where the economics are better for them to be sustainable. It will affect people's ability to digest information. It will affect their concentration span. It will also affect the way perhaps they internalize these ideas. And I think that the loss of the experience of reading, is one I think that will be deeply felt. But I think that we'll overcome those issues. The fact that we are able to access books a lot more easier now than before is something that perhaps is an advantage, to many of us. You can turn your book into a PDF and still sell it, and maybe you cannot see it on print, but nevertheless, the fact that you can see it on screen is still a way to communicate and to keep publishing and still make sure the standards are rigorous.
Inshallah. See, in terms of graphic design, right, we're getting back to design and publishing. Different projects often call for different styles and layout. As an award-winning graphic designer, could you share with us your thoughts process in searching for inspiration, ideation, and execution in your design work?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, but I mean, every single type of book has to be done in a different way. I mean, the act of reading a fiction book is not the same as reading an academic book, and an academic book is not the same as reading a history book. Perhaps a popular history book. A children's book books are not designed the same way as the ones for adults. We have to make decisions on fonts, on layouts, on the many factors which affect the design of a particular item. And so, first of all, you do have to know your audience. What is it for? Who is it for? How would their reading experience be? And I think that all of those issues affect the way you design that particular book. In the same way that you have different activities that require projects for different outputs. I remember in my youngest days at university when I was told to teach a book by Hisham Batalib. It was called The Training Manual for Islamic Workers. I refused because, to somehow give 10 plate answers, for how to do things, to me was turning human beings into robots or ideologues. And that's not what we wish to do. We want to make sure that we have critical faculty that can look at the problem and figure out how best to develop something that can be the most effective way of conveying that particular product to others. And in design, there are all kinds of rules. There's the tradition of design, and those have to be learned. If you are going to design, you have to know. If you're designing books for children, you have to know how to do it, and you have to learn the rules, and you have to learn the skills and of the craft. And the same goes for all the other genres. The way you select your type, your font, the way you select your paper, the way you select the size of the book, the way you select the amount of text that should be on the page, the way you select the printing process, all of it affects the way that the book will end up and how it will be effective to particular modes. We have abysmal designs in the Arab world for Arabic titles, amongst the Muslim community, because, it's almost as if we're not thinking when we design books. We used to have a great tradition of book publishing and binding and so on, but for somewhere along the lines in this modern age, I think the Muslim world kind of completely lost the art of producing a good and a handsome and an elegant book. And I think that tradition needs to return. So anyone, to answer your question, in a short way, without waffling too much, is that you have to really learn the art of designing books in the old-fashioned way, and learn all the principles that are fundamental to designing any printed page, whatever that happens to be, and make it elegant and effective, so that the written word is enhanced, and whatever the author wishes to convey, that's made effective even more. And then you can break your own rules. As you master these, you can push the whole industry forward. But without learning the rules, I don't recommend that anyone designs anything.
Siri, what is the most meaningful experience in your travel as media specialist?
It was in Benghazi in 2011, in about May, just at the beginning of the Libyan Revolution, when myself and my colleague and my mentor and my friend and my partner, Dr. Aref Ali Nayed, we both were in Benghazi at the time. And I noticed there a huge flurry of young people publishing, self-publishing. You know, they were printing magazines, designing, books. They were writing, for newspapers. I think that I saw probably 70 magazines in May 2011, that has suddenly come about because of the revolution, opened a particular, field of freedom for certain activities. And it was just amazing how many young people wanted to express themselves, and some amazing writers there who needed, of course, guidance, mentorship, support. They needed to, they needed money also to be able to engage in those activities, to support their ventures and to receive training. The saddest part of that was that all of that critical flurry and amazing energy died very quickly. With the growth, with the rise of militant and extremist movements in Benghazi, and the fact that NGOs did not help, in funding these young people, and the communities themselves didn't support them, meant that within a very short space of time, those 70 magazines whittled down to about 4 or 5. And it's a shame. It was an utter shame. I saw it happen in front of me, and it was one of the most inspiring things, and also one of the most depressing things that that I saw. And I hope that and along the way, of course, a young person who had so much energy lost hope in being able to contribute to the field of publishing and journalism and communication. And I think that was a sad development for Libya.
Yeah, I saw that the burning of Libya. Very sad to see it's happening. May Allah ease them. Were there any issues in the world that shocked you in your work in publishing?
Yeah, I mean, the two things still shock me. Every time I read or interview someone or come across, people from in particular politics. And one is the issue of human trafficking. It's so serious. It's so serious. From child abductions that happen in China to refugees, being pushed into human trafficking, to sex trade, and children being uprooted from their mothers and fathers and thrown into a life of crime. I mean, the whole, I remember at Islamica having to do a feature issue, a feature kind of article on that issue, and it was horrendous. I mean, it was absolutely horrendous. What women, in particular children and men, of course, have to go through as victims of human trafficking around the world. And the industry that perpetuates this is colossal. They're linked to mafias, they're linked to all kinds of enablers that make money out of tragedy, of human tragedy. And I think I still find it very, very difficult to hear and to kind of take in this information, particularly when you have families whose children were kidnapped, and suddenly, for all they know, they are as victims of the human trafficking kind of a mafia, industry. The second one was abuse in prisons. I think that's something that happens around the world, and we keep hearing it. Some of the abuse that we hear and see narrated is so. It's so disgraceful and disgusting and painful even to listen to. So, and it keeps happening. Even does not matter how many human rights conventions we have. Abuse still happens. Human beings hurt other human beings in very immoral, and kind of dehumanized ways. And every country's guilty of it.
Coming from that issues of human trafficking and abuse in prison, right, Sidi? When you face issues that are culturally or socially sensitive, right, how do you prepare yourself for it?
It depends. I mean, I went to study at the Vatican. I went to Rome to study Catholic theology because I was involved in interfaith relations. And I didn't want it to become a Zakir Naik type of, bashing. I hate that type of approach, because if I don't like evangelicals or everyone else bashing Muslims in the same way by reducing their religion to nothing, I equally should not like a Muslim doing the same for other religions. So I wanted to study. I went there. I wanted to listen. I wanted to study, to understand how is it, what they think, how do Catholics feel. I learned their history, their theology, their issues. And I did the same thing for Protestant theology. And that informed my work in Christian-Muslim relations. I think made it more effective, I think. And the same happens, with other issues that are of a sensitive nature. You have to study, you have to do your due diligence, you have to put your views to the side for a second, and do your due diligence of research. You have to talk to people who belong to that particular, whatever issue that's being affected that you are covering. And then you also have to bring some humility into your analysis. And of course, if you are dealing with really difficult, issues of an emotional kind, you do have to pray for guidance. You have to ask God also to make some of the discernments of these issues easier for you to grasp. Because when we are faced with data, whether it is data, that is of a human kind, or whether it is simply factual of economics and numbers or politics and developments, all of it requires absorption, and all of it requires you to structure that, that data into some kind of conclusion or some kind of observations. Then you want to be right. You want to make sure that you don't, exacerbate misunderstanding, because so much now is written, particularly about Muslims, or the Middle East, or Libya, that has no basis in reality, and it's either all of it simply a biased kind of, vindictiveness, or it is emanating out of sheer ignorance. And we have to make sure that we don't fall into the same trap, So humility is required, and of course the ability to ask a lot of questions, and very important questions, and chase that story, whatever it takes.
Allah, interesting, Sidi. We have been talking almost 1.5 hours, Sidi, mashallah. There's so much to learn from you, and so many questions that I like to ask, but I think due to time constraint, this is our last question, and hope to learn more from you soon, inshallah. The last question is, what were some of the most difficult interviews or story that you had to cover for you personally, or for any publication? Sorry, how do you deal with it? Yeah.
Well, I think for us, at least is Islamica, there are two things. One, the Islamica era was when we had to cover the Iraq war. That was difficult. We sent some of our reporters to Iraq. Several times we lost touch with them. The war was happening. One or two of them were arrested by militias and then released. And to get stories out of Iraq at the time was very hard, and particularly when there was a lot of destruction of religious sites, but also of human, a lot of deaths, a lot of assassinations, by competing forces. And I think that to me, because I was living in Jordan at the time, so, literally very near, in the geographic area, the whole issue was very immediate for us. And it was difficult. It was the responsibility of having to send reporters there and then making sure they're safe and, and they're avoiding the missile or the bomb or the bullet. But at the same time, being able to write about what they see and convey the stories back and have them published was difficult. But it was exactly what the magazine was all about. Later on, of course, to me personally, for the last 10 years, it's been the Libyan Revolution. To have been part of it, to see it firsthand, how a whole revolution was stolen by Islamists and radicals and so on, and how, for the last 10 years, a revolution that took so little time to kind of get going, a whole nation has been completely torn apart by vested interests. For me, that was the most painful experience so far, and I hope that Libya comes out of it victorious.
Inshallah, I mean. Thank you, Sidi. We had a wonderful and blessed time with you, listening to your experience, and mashallah, I wish we can continue more, but alhamdulillah, time constraint. Thank you very much for being with us. May Allah preserve you, and may we continue to benefit from the works that you are doing. Each time we look at your book, inshallah, we always inspired to do good and to do well, and inshallah.
Well, I have a book coming out soon, and that's called a Portrait of Libya, and it features three cities: Benghazi, Tripoli, and Bani Walid. And there's no politics involved there, but these pictures I've taken over 10 years of the country, of its people, architecture, and so on. You know what makes it very, very beautiful, and that's one way to appreciate perhaps what Libya has to offer, to its own future generations and to the world.
We are looking forward to it, inshallah. I'm sure it will be available at Warda soon.
Very soon.
Yeah,
maybe not in print edition, maybe in digital format.
Oh, okay. If then also we are looking forward to it, Sidi. Thank you very much once again. May Allah preserve you. Keep in touch again, and looking forward to work with you again soon, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much to you guests. Bye bye.
Assalamualaikum. Waalaikumsalam.